use the word spiritual humanism. Are you able to define these two words, which some people would consider to be quite separate, but if you're able to define them, or at least talk about what you mean by this? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a very beautiful question to explore. You see, I interact with the British Humanist Association. The chief executive, Andrew Cox is a personal friend, but we keep shoving each other. He said, Mr. Lakhani, you are just matter, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and you are this complex being, so respect humanity as this complex evolutionary accidents of nature. You are special, Mr. Lakhani, human being. It's called humanism. This is the focus, not God. Humanism sounds so nice, so warm. I said, no, I don't agree. I say, you are more than matter. You are not output of matter. Because you are so fixated on matter, you want to reduce me to carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, wound up like this. There's nothing more to me? Oh no, there's nothing more to you, Mr. Lakhani. Live with it. I said, no, I don't agree. We are more than matter. They said, no, we don't agree. I said, we are the spirit. And you know what the fun I have with them? They say, Mr. Lakhani, the only spirit we believe in comes in bottles at Christmas time. But I'm equally naughty. I say, yes, but the spirit I'm doing gives you bigger kick. Try it. So this is our true nature. So what is the story? The story is this. I am actually there's a lot of interaction with the chief philosopher of British Humanists and myself, and they allowed me to write articles in their magazine as well. I'm saying it's time for you to give this very stodgy, lifeless vision of humanism as nothing more than matter and incorporate the word spiritual. They said, no. I said, I'm going to push it in. The reason is this. I am saying we are not material beings. This is, if you like, the Dawkins vision. We are not material beings aspiring to the idea of spirit so we can live better with each other, just conjuring the idea of spirit so that we can be better behaved. This is what they are suggesting, the humanists. This idea of religious, it's just basically a ploy to behave better with each other, but we are good human beings. That's it, humanism. I say, no. We are not material beings just aspiring to spirituality. We are essentially spiritual beings on a material journey. This is called spiritual humanism. Do you know why I will win? It's a matter of time before I take Richard Dawkins on. The reason why I'll win is this. He's a biologist. I'm a physicist. And actually, when it comes to the nitty-gritty, physics can trump biology. Let me tell you how. Why I'm going to win. The biologist, Mr. Lakhani, is all to do with this DNA and the gene, and that's how life is all about. Gene wants to replicate. That's all that life is all about. Purpose of life, said Richard Dawkins, is replicate, keep reproducing. Okay. I said, no, hang on. The real reason why you got this DNA sitting like this, do you know what it's called in physics? It's called a quantum phenomena. The reason why the DNA sits in this particular manner, the molecule, is called a quantum phenomena. It cannot be explained in any other terms except the word quantum. That's the central feature of physics. And I come from that lobby. I say it's quantum. And do you know what quantum is telling you? This is the findings of fathers of quantum mechanics, Erwin Schrödinger. He said, my friends, if you think you can explain this creation in terms of matter or its epiphenomena, you're going to be doomed. You'll fail. Because underpinning to this reality is non-material, says quantum mechanics. You say, what is it? What is it? Don't ask. We don't have language for it. It's certainly not matter. This comes out of physics. So when the time comes, I would simply say, but then this DNA, to explain you require quantum. So of course we need the quantum. Everything you got at the moment is built on quantum. You know that? Everything, all of the reality is based on quantum. The reason why the electron doesn't jump into the proton and disappear, merge, is quantum. The whole universe is held together by quantum. It's central in sciences. So I said that quantum is telling us, underpinning to this reality is non-material. So if matter is just secondary phenomena, epiphenomena, why should I be fixated on it? You are fixated, I'm not fixated on it. I'm fixated on the primary phenomena, underpinning to matter. That is essentially, we call it spiritual, like it or not. This is where we stand, and this dialogue is going to carry on. And hopefully, with your prayers, I may win.
Wow, that was one wonderful video from Jai Bhai. So beautifully presented a special term, spiritual humanism. Now, some people might think spiritual and humanism don't go together because of the meaning of those terms. So Vijay Bhai, what is the meaning of humanism, and can spiritual be added on top? What is your thought?
I think this is an amazing, term. When you put these two words together, they really mean a lot, because this is one of the central themes of Jay Bhai. I mean, he spent basically his whole his spiritual life explaining these two words. You know, we all say that we are humans, yes, but that doesn't mean, it just means, a person, right? But the essence of a human, humanism, which is why we are so special. That's the key term, which is all well and good, because you all say, humanism is what we need in this world to make a better world, a more animal friendly world. We only have humanism, means the essential qualities of humanism, which make us special and why we should be, do good things and whatever. But is that enough on its own? That just means, we are just a material kind of being, which is what, as Jay Bhai mentioned, what the humanist society believes, that we are so intricate, so special, the ultimate, the pinnacle of evolution. So we should be very, be very humanist and be loving to each other. That's all well and good. But is there more to us? Like, why are we so self-aware? What is so special about us? And that's where the word spiritual comes in. We're not just a human, but we are a spiritual human. And the thing I like about this term a lot, which I used to have discussed with Jay Bhai, is a universal term. It doesn't divide people into groups, doesn't make, this religion, that religion. It's a general term. So the essence of our life, what's our essence? And this is the key thing, which is that we are actually the spirit, and not in the bottle, but a true spirit in the sense of a spiritual being. And that's what makes us even more special than just a kind of a cocoa evolution. The idea that we are a divine spirit. And so these two words together are so special. I mean, one thing to say is that, the idea that, do we know? Because, the thing about science is that they work on empirical facts and they won't transcend that. And this is the problem, because even the earliest, the quantum physicists, which Jay Bhai mentioned, Erwin Schrödinger, Werner Heisenberg, they worked on this matter. Eventually, they went further and further. They just couldn't pin down what is the essence of all life. They couldn't pin it down. You can go to quarks, sub-quarks, you can keep on doing that. Ultimately, what is the underpinning? And this is, I think, I must give, hands up to the quantum physicists. And they actually said, look, actually, we don't know. If you go further down, we can say that the root of everything is not matter. They figured that out. They just don't know what that is. And what we are saying, or the ancient Indic, Hinduism is saying, actually, there's something special. That's a spirit. And I like the term that Vijay mentioned, that you're not a material being aspiring to be spiritual. We're already the spirit. We're just on a material journey trying to figure out that we're actually the spirit again. So kind of wiggling out of the material world. So that's what makes it special. We already are special. We just have to figure out that we are that special thing. And that's where all the other terms come in, the Atman, Brahman. And I think someday science will have to accept. They can't keep on being fixated saying, because we can't work any further down than the material, we can't break down any further. We stick with it and we work with that. That is just too limiting. And that's what Jay Bhai has been banging his head at so many doors to explain to people that you guys are stuck somewhere. Please move on. But, we are where we are. Sita Ben.
No, I love that quote. I think it's a Swami Vivekananda quote about us being not material beings on a spiritual journey, but spiritual beings on a material journey. It's a really beautiful quote. And as I was discussing with Manish Bhai just before we started, is the term spiritual humanism actually is something that Dad came up with, because when you put these two terms together, as it was in the video, they sound like a contradiction in terms, because humanism is all about, you're human, you're a material being, and spiritual is sort of tagged onto that. But that's essentially what we are saying, is that we are not that sort of material body. And it's evident not just in terms of, our human relationships and all of that, but at this sort of deep quantum level. And there are so many sort of examples of that in the natural world. For example, if you get a sunbeam of light and it hits the leaf, how does that beam of light know where to go in that leaf in order for photosynthesis to happen? When, a baby is being conceived in the womb, how do you know which cells need to go where in order to create a human being? Surely if it's all a random, material process, how do all the things know where they're supposed to go? So at the sort of deeper quantum level, they've discovered that, you know, it's not so much about things and particles and atoms and smaller versions of atoms. It's more about the interconnections rather than things. So the whole sort of everything is just a web of connections, and everything seems to know where it's supposed to be going. I actually just read an article recently that, you know, when there is a child in the mother's womb, the mother's health actually improves because the cells which are being used to create the baby actually know if there are any other problems in the mother's body, and they go and find it and resolve it. And I just find that absolutely incredible. How does that cell know to go to this particular problem? There's a heart problem or whatever. But how does that cell know where to go? How does any organism form? Because surely if it's just a material thing, how does it know to form into this particular shape, this particular organ, this cell? It's absolutely incredible. So it's not a small thing. It's not a fluffy, airy-fairy thing. The fact is that everything is a directed process, and it's not just random mutations where things happen to just fit together. There is some directed process, and quantum helps us to understand that in a sort of very scientific way. So yeah, it's a really fascinating topic to discuss.
It's so wonderful to hear, Sitaben and Vijay Bhai. First of all, the definition of spiritual humanism, and then the things Sitaben covered, photosynthesis, and this how when women is pregnant, how the cells automatically improve their health. It is amazing, and such complexity in the world, and science trying to find answers and to many questions and discovering all these wonderful facts, and we are not able to, or they are not able to pinpoint what is behind all this. And I think that's where Sanatan Dharma, Hinduism comes in, and they says it's the spirit manifesting and doing all these wonderful things. And it's so wonderful to see this and try to make sense of it is mind-boggling. And when it goes to the very complex or very when you go to very large or very small, that's where things get muddled, and you come up with something which science is not able to answer what is going on. So wonderful stuff. Jay Bhai came up with this spiritual humanism term, which is absolutely wonderful. But is this idea very new? Is this a new thing? Because this term is very new. Or has this idea always been in part of Hinduism, Sanatan Dharma, Sitaben? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, it really has. I mean, it's because, you know, in ancient India, we weren't speaking in English and all of that, but these terms and these sort of concepts were present right from ancient times, because we understand, I mean, the definition of everything is essentially spirit, and that's what Brahman is. Brahman means sort of vast, cosmic. So we're recognizing that the underpinning to everything is the same. It's that unity behind the apparent diversity that there is. And, you know, we have all these sort of elaborate Sanskrit terms to describe it, but because we are living in a very sort of different world now where, you know, there's a diaspora, we're kind of, you know, speaking English as our main language, we had to sort of come up with sort of the English sort of versions that which come closest to describing those very subtle Sanskrit words that we were using in ancient times. So that's why the term sort of spiritual humanism is beautiful, because it sounds like a contradiction, but it's actually pointing to the same direction that we were sort of saying since ancient times, that everything is essentially spirit. And what's so beautiful is that physics is actually coming to a similar conclusion, but it's sort of reluctant to do so, because the whole sort of the reason that science is at the stage it is today is because of all of the advances in terms of the material world. From a material framework, it's allowed such a tremendous amount of progress. The last few hundred years have been incredible, and they have changed our lives. So scientists sort of get attached to that idea, they get attached to the theories which have enabled all of these things to happen. But when it comes to quantum and trying to understand how these things are all connected, how does this cell know to go here and how does that cell know to go there? And there's no sort of explanation. I mean, Dawkins and this idea of random mutation, it can only take you so far. So it's incredible that at the heart of science, we are coming to this juncture where we're going to have to then make a leap away from the material, and physics eventually turns into metaphysics, which is really beautiful. But it takes a long time for the human mindset to change and to accept this reality which is there. I mean, if you say, oh, it's just airy-fairy and something you find in meditation, you might be inclined to say, oh, well, yeah, who knows, it could be true, it could not be true. But the fact that science actually coming to those kind of conclusions on its own, without reference to any religion or God or spirit or anything, really strongly suggests that there is something beautiful underpinning to it. And I think it's a beautiful thing that the world is not just matter, because it's actually pretty depressing. Matter is very crass and very awful, and things fall apart all the time, whereas the spirit is eternal and beautiful. So why not accept that beautiful reality of life? Vijay Pai? You're on mute.
So I think Sita, you've got it very beautifully. All I can add is, as Sita mentioned, that it's always been part of Indic ideas. This idea of quest for who we are, what is our true nature, is in Upanishad. So it's not a new idea, but I still like the term spiritual humility. It's very beautifully put in this modern world. I think the only point I can add is that actually more and more, the youth are running away from this idea of, fixed religions, controlling religions, whereas the God sitting in the heavens, trying to stick to either giving you, a carrot and stick kind of approach, yeah. And most people, are just kind of fed up with that. They don't really want to play that game anymore. So this spiritual humility actually opens a lot of new doors of people on how to explore who you truly are and what your, aims in life are, what you're trying to find, the answers you're trying to find for yourself. All this is becoming more and more, important. So I think this term humans will in future go really, really far.
That's wonderful to hear, Vijay Bhai. So we got a question from Judge for YouTube, very close to that. So he's saying everyone has their own understanding of the word spiritual. It seems to have got into muddy waters. What's the exact definition of the word spiritual? And does it have anything to do with religion and God? Or can you be spiritual without God? What's your take on it, Vijay Bhai?
Very interesting question. This is a very big term in that sense. I have actually been to some interfaith dialogues and discussed this. And if you ask somebody from Abrahamic faith, spiritual means somebody who is God-centered, who actually is, very, very pious and very, very holy, who really believes in the God in the heavens. And that's spiritual to them. It's not like the way we see it. But I think the term spiritual should not be linked, in my view, to a theos in heaven. It's your own individual goal, trying to find out who you truly are. As we mentioned earlier, atheists or some of these people who are kind of evolutionaries, they're happy saying that, okay, we are just the matter, that's it. But we are saying, no, there's something more to us than that. And that's what we mean by spiritual. There's something driving us. There's a force which percolates, everything in this universe. And that kind of binds us. So what is that force? And that is the key thing that we see as spiritual term. But yes, I agree that the term spiritual can be seen in many different ways by many different people. So I think one thing you have to be careful is, some people say spiritualism and spiritual. Be careful about it, because spiritualism is the one when you hold hands, with a seance and see fine. So you have to be careful how you see that term. But this word spiritual has always been a central part of Hinduism as the Atman, the divine force in us, which actually drives, and this is what you're trying to find. And that's how we see the word spiritual. But of course, because it's not an objective term, people will have their views on that, and that's fine too. Let everybody explore spiritual, in their own way, what spiritual means. Sita?
Yeah, I think that's actually the beauty of the idea of spirituality, is that you can't really put it into words, because it's meant to be beyond our sort of realm of existence, what we think is around us and everything. So it's sort of something that goes beyond language. And, so many, prophets and saints throughout the ages across the world, not just in India, all over the world, have tried so hard to put this term into words. And, in Hinduism, we've got things like, consciousness, existence, all of these amazing terms. But, for someone who is a lay person and, they've never experienced anything spiritual, they're like, oh, yeah, that's just a normal term. But, it's just this mind-blowing experience that you can only actually experience for yourself. And the beauty of it is that you can sort of reach that experience through such a variety of different ways, that as we've talked many times, through any kind of religion, any sort of disciplined human endeavor, as we have said many times. So any sort of art or music or anything which really inspires you, you're kind of sipping from that nectar of spirituality. And the wonderful thing is that kind of happiness or bliss is completely different to the kind of happiness that you get from the material world, because the happiness you derive from the material world there's a limited amount of it, it's a fixed amount. And when you have that happiness, have that ice cream or have that, whatever nice experience, you are actually taking that away from somebody else. So if you're the last person in the queue to have an ice cream at the ice cream van, the person behind you isn't going to get it. So there's a limited set amount of happiness that can be derived from the material world. And by having it, you do get a temporary fizz, but you're ultimately taking that experience away from somebody else. Like suppose there's a music concert, everyone is rushing to get a ticket to that concert. You are by having that ticket, you are depriving someone else of having that ticket and having that happiness or whatever. So the happiness you derive from the material world is limited, whereas the happiness or bliss that you derive from the spiritual realm is unlimited. It doesn't matter what a beautiful experience you have, does not take anything away from anybody else. It's just there, it's infinite, it's vast. And it's, that's the way that we can ultimately get that amazing happiness. You don't get that fizz and then that feeling of, oh, I shouldn't have had that ice cream. You get that buzz for a long, long time. And the more that we are able to sort of sip on that spirituality, the better quality of life we can have and the more spiritual progress that we can make.
That's wonderful to hear, sipping the spirituality. Just the thought came to my mind, are those people playing computer games and video games, are they sipping spirituality as well, Sitaben?
Well, I mean, I have no experience with that, so I don't really know. But I mean, maybe the fact that they are so involved in this activity, maybe they are sort of, forgetting all their sort of material surroundings and who they are and all of that. Maybe that's, like a concentrating your mind on it, then maybe it is. But the fact that I know that in computer games you're kind of trying to fight with other people and all sorts of things, so I don't know how that works, because you're trying to beat other people and blow them up and stuff, and I don't really know too much. Shiv, I don't know.
I think, well, I know some gamers who are very, very into gaming. They're quite nice people, but I think when you do gaming, I'm not sure you're doing it in a structured manner. You're just playing and getting lost into it. I mean, there are many ways to get lost in thought, dreaming or something. So I'm not sure that's the best way, but it's part of life. People sometimes get lost in thoughts. They forget their material. It's a question of how you guide and train that to work towards your spiritual goals, I guess. But yeah, tricky question.
Wonderful answer, Sitaben Vijay. So we got a chatter from the end. He's saying there is a basic definition to spirit. Spirit is that which is not subject to consequence. Would you agree to that definition? Spirit is that which is not subject to consequence. Vijay?
Okay, so in Hinduism, if you look at the Atman idea, we say the Atman itself is never born, never dies, is not bound by anything. It's a Jivatma. When you have these characters come together, you think you're bound. And these forces of nature, the three gunas, which Krishna mentions a lot in the Gita, they drive you to all these things and they're part of consequence. So if you look at it in that sense, then yes, it is not bound by consequence. That's correct, yeah. Sita?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's something that's beyond the realm of what we experience in our sort of physical material world. So yeah, I completely agree with that.
Excellent. So he's saying that people, so the questioner is saying there is a basic, okay. People label me an atheist when I point out that the soul is not real because they don't know the difference between the soul and the spirit. Wonderful. The self is spirit, but it is not a soul. Wow.
Yeah.
So yes, these two terms are again intermingled as well. Because in English the word soul is used, which in a way is not same as Atman. Sitaben, you want to elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, so I mean, once the sort of spirit becomes embodied into a body and mind framework, then we tend to call it the soul, or we call it Jivatman as well. So, you know, it's that little individualized, sort of personalized spirit, which we call soul, I guess. And, you know, it's got its own character, it goes around, it's got its own identity. And then when that sort of Jivatman passes on to another body, that same character comes into the next body and that kind of thing. So that's how it progresses. But it just reminds me of that beautiful example that Dad has used many times, that, you know, suppose you go to the seaside and it's a nice sunny day, and when you look on the crest of every wave of the sea, you see a reflection of the sun, and, you know, the waves are sort of tossing and turning and appearing and disappearing. But it's all about not recognizing that you are not just that reflection, you are actually the sun, which is at the top. So it's all about recognizing the difference between that. Vijay?
Yeah, I think this is a very important distinction here, because I have had this argument actually again with the, people who are from the kind of Abrahamic kind of faith, because their idea is that God actually creates the soul out of his love. Now, for the Indic faith, that doesn't make sense, because the essence of creation itself, as Chandra mentions, is a consequence of something. So when you the essence of creation, if you create something, it has to be in the material world. It cannot transcend the material world. So where the spirit is something that transcends, it's not bound by time and space or possession. So spirit is totally different. So the idea Sita mentioned, soul is Jivatman. That's how we see the soul, something which changes, which goes through struggles, and is bound by this, space and time kind of terms. That's why it's very difficult for people from the Indic faith to understand how can you create something that lasts for eternity. It doesn't make sense, because that means that it's actually living eternity in time. Whereas what we are saying, Hindus are saying that the idea of speed transcends the idea of space, time, and causation. As Sita mentioned, we're just stuck in a material journey. But actually, ultimately, we are not part of that, because in the realm of Maya or material existence, we have this space, time, and causation. But actually, we are beyond that, and that's the spirit. So I think there's a key distinction here, which is very difficult to explain if you brought up in Abrahamic faith, because the roots are different, I guess. But it's important to keep this distinction. I agree. Keep that in mind.
Wonderful, Vijay Bhai. So as we saw with Jay Bhai, when he talked to youngsters, the teens, the youths, they love this idea of spiritual humanism and the idea that there's something special about us. We are all spiritual beings. They agreed. And I think they all were very impressed by the whole explanation that Jay Bhai used to give them. And the question is, okay, if we accept we are spiritual being, and the spiritual humanism terms sounds very nice, how do we practice in our lives, Vijay Bhai?
Okay, I think the first thing is that we have to have that calling that, okay, I want to know who I truly am. Because if you're just going to spend your life in material existence and you're so much engrossed in this, you will not come to that kind of start the journey. But I suspect everybody in their life, at some point in life, they come to that state, they go, what am I doing here? Who am I? Am I just a lump of carbon or lump of matter? There's more to, and that's the start of your journey. And luckily for for our Indian faith, we have vast number of great men and women who have experienced it, which is the Rishikas, experience this stage. So that's a very good guide for us. Actually, we can actually do as well and try and find who we truly are. But yeah, it's a question that many people would take it more seriously. Some people say, okay, I can't be bothered at the moment. But some point in your journey, which is through many lifetimes, you will go for that goal and try and find out who you truly are. Sita?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone will sort of reach a point in their life where maybe not this life, maybe future lives, where, you know, they just find that, you know, they think that they're going to get happiness from a certain thing, whether it's going on nice holidays or cruises or getting a nice house and all of that. And people think, you know, that's all there is to life. But eventually you'll start realizing that that fizz doesn't last forever. It's a temporary fizz, because, you know, then you start getting more worries. You're like, oh, how am I going to get insurance on this big house? What if some burglar comes and steals everything from it? So sometimes you find that the happiness that you get from the material world comes with a whole load of extra baggage and stress as well. And when you sort of start realizing that, it makes you want to search deeper for answers, for a solution to the human condition, because everything that you sort of try and search for in the material world doesn't give a long-lasting answer, a long-lasting satisfaction. So that's probably when you would turn to a more sort of spiritual approach to life and think that it's not all about accumulating more and more wealth, or, you know, achieving all these materialistic goals. There's much more to life than that. And that's when your spiritual journey starts. And it's one of those things that it's such an incredibly personal journey that you can't force it on anybody. If you try and sort of, you know, dictate to somebody that leave everything, abandon everything and go and meditate in the forest, they're all going to scream and run away. So it has to be a very personal journey where you then start exploring, looking at the teachings of various prophets and saints from the past, or, you know, ancient past or modern past, who really touch you. And then you can use their teachings as guidance as to how you can live your life in a much more spiritual way. So amazingly, what we were talking about with quantum, that it's more about the interconnections than the things, the material bits. It's all about all of those interconnections. So you can translate that into your human relationships as well. So it's not all about me, and acquiring more material things for me. It's about my interconnections. And amazingly, I think Dad has mentioned previously, Harvard University did a very extensive study on happiness, and they found that the thing which gives you the greatest happiness in life is not material things. It's actually the human relationships that you have. So the more varied human relationships you have, the greater your happiness, and I guess your spiritual quotient, in a way which we're using for, of course, goes up. So yeah, it just shows that happiness cannot really be achieved through the material world. It's essentially a spiritual thing, getting that happiness in that place.
Oh, wonderful to hear that. Happiness is not a material thing, and to be really happy, you should do good for others. And that leads to this Swami Vivekananda saying that worship Jiva and Siva. Jiv Seva is service to mankind, is service to God. How is that coming from, again, the spiritual humanism idea, Sita-Ben?
Yes, of course. I mean, in a seemingly sort of materialistic way of life, which means, you know, going out there, earning a job, paying your mortgage, having a car and all of that, you think, oh, that's a very materialistic way of living. But there is a way that you can practice spirituality at the heart of this very materialistic way of living, because the way you do that is by putting the needs of others before your own. And a lot of people do that very naturally. They think of their children before they think of their needs. They think of their elderly before they think of their needs. So that's essentially practicing spirituality in your day-to-day life. You know, it's very important to put the needs of others before our own. And that's what we learn in the Grihastha Ashram, the system of Hinduism, that as a householder, for example, you fulfill, you know, all sorts of aims and objectives, material objectives, but you also can lead an incredibly spiritual life in the midst of a materialistic, so-called materialistic life. And that's when you derive the greatest happiness. When you see, you know, that reminds me of another example that we've often used is, you know, suppose you tell a child for your birthday, you can either have, you know, this massive cake to yourself and you can eat as much of that cake as you want, or you have the chance to share that massive cake with your friends. which would give you the greatest happiness. And obviously, a child may be tempted to go for having the cake by themselves, but ultimately they'll find that the greatest happiness comes from sharing that cake with others, seeing the happy grins on the other children's faces. That's where you derive the happiness of life, essentially, and that's essentially spirituality. That's spirit shining out through those eyes, as Dad always says. So yeah, sharing and caring for others is essentially spiritual living. Vijay?
No, I agree. I mean, that the term that we have, spiritual humanism, and what Swami Vivekananda is talking about, like only those who live for others are truly alive. The rest are, walking dead. Makes a lot of sense, because ultimately, if you believe in the idea of this divine spirit and the spirit is universal, then it just makes sense to serve the spirit in others. So it should come as naturally to us. And of course, if we are truly divine spiritual beings, then that will give us a lot of happiness. It just flows naturally from who we are. As a matter, that's another proof that actually the spirit is bigger than matter, because it gives us more satisfaction. Yeah, so I think absolutely true. Yeah.
That's wonderful answer, Vijay Bhai. So this leads to next question. How does spiritual humanism, this idea of worshipping Jiva and Seva, relate to Dvaita philosophy, which essentially thinks that human beings and God is two separate entities and they can never be one?
So, yeah, valid point. I mean, to be honest, when you look very closely to the Dvaita and Advaita, it looks very different from layman's terms. But ultimately, when I ask somebody who is a Dvaita believer, who believes in God as man and separate, they will say the same thing. We should serve all life on earth. We should serve all humanity because they're the creation of God. And as such, they are special. We should serve them. But one important thing to keep in mind, even the people who are Dvait, people who say, I will go to Gokul Dham or Akshar Dham, or, I go to Indralok. Ultimately, even when they're in that state, they're continuously fixed on the divine God. It's not a place where you go and enjoy, material things like a big house or a palace. It's not like that. Even in that sense, you're so close to God, you're always fixed on God. Whereas Dvait says, actually, you are God. So ultimately, if you look very carefully, there's not much difference. It's difference very superficial on how you approach God, because it is not a place. Once I actually asked my mother as well. So when I go to Akshardham, which is in the Swamian tradition, what happens? Do I go and do bhajans every day, and do I have a big house and live a happy person? No, you'll be always be in a state of mind where nothing apart from God comes in your head. You're fixed on God for eternity, and that gives the ultimate pleasure. So if I'm almost fixed on God and I'm merged into God, what's the difference? I don't think there's much difference here. So ultimately, I think they're the same thing. So yeah, Sita Ben.
Yeah, no, I think you covered it amazingly. I mean, that's the thing, is essentially the conclusion of Dvait is recognizing that you are not separate from the object of your devotion. You are essentially, you merge with that divine in that way. So essentially, they lead to the same destination. And we've seen, I've mentioned previously that example of Hanuman. There's that image of Hanuman who opens his chest, and there's a picture of Ram inside. So he was, the most sort of ardent devotee of Ram, and he found that when, in his heart there was Ram there already. So once your love is that sort of, complete and full, you realize that there is no sort of distinction between you and the object of your love and devotion. And that's essentially what Advait is all about, recognizing that you are the spirit. Whereas, from the Dvait perspective, you kind of have this sort of relationship that you build, and you become closer and closer to that image of God, and until you can no longer see yourself as separate to that image of God. And that's a beautiful thing.
Wonderful stuff, Sita Ben. So this leads us to this next question, which we were unable to take last week, but we were talking about philosophies and Dvaita and Advaita. And someone asked, what are some other Indian philosophies that are as complex as Kashmir Saivism? Vijay Bhai, do you want to go on that one?
Yeah, I think, Kashmir Saivism, we know, is incredibly complex because Kashmir, by the way, the Sharda Pit, one of the ancient universities there, they produce huge amount of scholars. I think there is one, I forgot the name now, of scholar. He's written about 30,000 verses on Shiva alone. It's immensely complex stuff. But I mean, Hinduism, India has been such a nation of prolific, writers and prolific, seekers of spiritualism. So the Agama literature in South India is immensely vast. The Vedanta philosophies, we have Ramanuja, Shankara, and the commentaries they've done, vast commentaries on all these scriptures, they are quite vast. So in essence, also the search for the truth have been produced immensely complex, literature, complex ideas. But ultimately, it can always simplify in one term, is to achieve moksha and find out who you truly are. But it's part of, Indic traditions, because we have very, very big prolific writers. We've done tons and tons of stuff. Some are good, some are not good, some are very good. So, we have vast library of collection of stuff. So, yeah, I guess why Kashmir Shaivism is immensely complex because of the deep scholars there, deep thinkers. You can say the same for something like Tamil Nadu. The Agama literature is also very vast. So I guess there are quite a few examples like that, not just Kashmir Shaivism. Sita Ben?
Yeah, no, there's not much more I can add. I mean, there's a whole array of different philosophies and schools of thought. And I think that's just the beauty of Hinduism, is that it's a democracy and you can choose however complex the one that you want. You can choose the however simplest one that you want, whichever one suits you and your temperament is the best one for you.
Wonderful. So we got a nice comment from Matrix. Is saying, it's amazing that this channel is still going strong after Lakhani sir. Thank you for keeping this going. Thank you. We are committed to keep it going, and we hope we continue to keep growing as well. He's asking this question: if Brahman is everything, how can we relate to him? Is Brahman a living being? Does it or him care about humans? Sitaben?
So this is the thing. The idea of Brahman is it's a principle. So it's not, a person, although a lot of people find it very, very difficult to relate to something which is so impersonal. So especially in Hinduism, we're very good at impersonalizing this sort of vast, infinite spirit into gods with form, and we've got so many hundreds of thousands of different forms of gods and goddesses, which allows us to sort of polarize our understanding of spirituality and focus all of our energies in building a relationship with that form of God, because we're so used to building human relationships with our family and our friends. We sort of transpose that onto this idea of God through Ram or whoever it is, Shiva or whoever it is. So for many, that is the right way for them. But I think the world is changing dramatically, and there are a lot of people out there who do not think that that's the right way for them. And in a way, they need to sort of see a more sort of broader vision of spirituality, and that's actually what ancient Hindu philosophy is all about. That's how the whole sort of journey started, is through this principle-based understanding of reality, of spirituality, because the underpinning to everything is essentially divine. That's what we have discovered through this amazing journey of introspection, and this vast principle. There's no sort of baggage which comes with it, because if you think, oh, does this Brahman care about me or not, or whatever, it's not a person, it's just a principle, like a law of nature. So it's not partial or impartial. This is just the way the cookie crumbles. And when you think of a God with form, there comes a tremendous amount of baggage, and it actually pushes a lot of people away from religion, because you think of God in a personalized way, which is beautiful and lovely, but for those who challenge it, they say, well, what an unjust, cruel, horrific world that this personal God has created. All the tremendous amount of suffering throughout the entire living kingdom. How can an all-loving, all-compassionate, all-powerful God allow for this? It's a tremendous injustice. Either your God is incredibly cruel, or she is not as powerful as you make them out to be. So this is the wonderful thing, is this principle-oriented approach is much more philosophically sound, because all of those questions are wiped away. This is just saying, this is the unity behind the diversity. This is how the cookie crumbles. And the whole aim of our life is to recognize that we need to come out of our tiny mind-body framework and recognize that we are that. That's all there is to life. The tremendous amount of suffering and all of that will disappear once you recognize that identity with the spirit. So principle oriented is much more philosophically sound than a personal God in that sense. Vijay, like?
I think, Sita, you have pretty much covered it. What I can add is that, yeah, remember one thing, that as Brahman and Sita mentioned, as a principle, it binds everything, not just humans, but all life on earth, all animate, inanimate, is a binding force. It binds everything. So I think sometimes you have to be careful that if you said principle bringing down in human form, we can limit it. While it's all well and good for worship or to relate to somebody, a supreme being in a human form, but ultimately it has to be in a principle form. And that's, I think we should keep that in mind. Yeah. Manish, bye.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Vijay Bhai. So, Vijay Bhai, when we come to try to put this spiritual humanism in practice, sometimes, we are going in a train and someone come with a cup saying, please help me. And if I pull out, put my hand in pocket and put some money in there, that's me done. But sometimes my mind is thinking, and I think, maybe they are just doing it as like a job, and this is their job to beg, and this is how they are making a living, and they shouldn't be doing that. And so as a spiritual humanist, should you be thinking like that, or should you just try to help anyone who comes across and just be, helpful? What is your take on it?
It's very challenging, because as a spiritual human, if you're really a spiritual person, you will feel immediately something for it, and you feel like giving money. I mean, quite often I know that we have to follow what advice you get from the government. Quite a few of these actually begging gangs. They've been forced into begging by gangs to actually collect money on their behalf, and they become very rich in this process. And the person who's begging actually gets nothing; he just gets a little piece of bread or something. And sometimes I've just bought a sandwich and given it. But it's a good thought that you feel that you have to give. And sometimes even when I know that actually this money is going to be used by someone's going to take it away, I just can't help when you just give. But I think we should try and follow the advice you get from people who know better, like the people who do the social services. They understand this concept much better. And I think we should try and follow the advice. And as painful as it looks, because ultimately the right thing to do is perhaps not to give and ask them to go to a feeding center or something. Yeah. But yeah, if you don't feel anything, then it's not a nice thing. That means you're not really working on the spiritual aspects, right? So it's always good to feel something and feel that pain. But the solution is perhaps not giving the money and throwing money in there, because that might even create more problems. But this is a challenge I think we all have in our minds. Anybody who feels for other fellow human beings, we always have this challenge. So it's not something that we can get away from that easily. Sita, Ben?
Yeah, no, I agree. Actually, when I do see people like that on the street, I feel horrible. I feel terrible. But I also think that, by giving them money like that, you're kind of keeping them on the street. It's much, my opinion anyways, to give to an organised charity like Shelter or whoever does work for the homeless or the needy, because they know how to funnel the funds into the right place, because you're kind of encouraging them to stay there in a way, maybe. And as Vijay Bhai said, there are all sorts of scams out there where, people are sort of pushing the vulnerable to go and get money for them, and you don't know where that money is going. So at least if it goes to an organised charity, they can do something about it in the right sort of more constructive way, get that person off the street rather than encouraging them to stay on the street. And although, we say spiritual humanism and, we have to care for everything and everyone, we also have to remember that we're living in a material world as well. And there are people out there who will try and scam you and cheat you. And because we're all spirit doesn't mean everyone is pure and pristine. I mean, we all are essentially, but there are people out there who will try and scam you. So you have to also be careful and remember that you are spirit too. So don't let yourself be taken advantage of.
That is wonderful to hear. Very practical advice there, Sita Ben, and thanks for that. We got a comment from Trushar Patel saying, harmonious and uniting idea, which is very relevant for the globalized digital economy we are living in. Please share more knowledge on spiritual humanism. Thank you, Trushar. We'll continue to work on that. We got a question from Dhanalakshmi Gangadharan. She's asking, please explain the difference between Kashmir Saivism and South Saiva Siddhanta. Are they two different things, Vijay Bhai?
Actually, this is a very big topic. Yeah, it can take months and months to go through. But in short, Kashmir Shaivism is very special in the sense that it's based on the idea of knowledge. The idea of Gnan and, knowledge of, of things, the knowledge of the spirit. So their Shaivism is based on the idea of how do you achieve moksha through Gnan. That's why you notice in Kashmir, they're not this vast, elaborate temples, rituals in Kashmir Shaivism. It's far, far more debates, and what is tattva, what is moksha, what is Atman, why are we here? That's been the root of this Kashmir Shaivism. And that's why where South India, I think, is more devotional, more ritualistic. But nevertheless, both ultimately they were the same goal anyways. The approaches are different. But if you go deep, then it's a huge, you go a huge, kind of a gauntlet of ideas come through. But by and large, I think in the basic terms, I would say that Kashmir Shaivism is the idea of knowledge, Gnan. Mind you, I was wondering, initially in Kashmir, when it's really cold in winter and dark, what do they do? Because they'll be freezing trying to do all these havans and whatever. So I guess they're thinking in the room, by the fire, giving deep thoughts on who we are and what is this idea of Shiva as Gnan and all that. So I think the roots are different, geography is different. So they have different ideas and different thoughts. But by and large, Shiva is so special, as Sita has mentioned a while back. It's so versatile and so diverse. Because Shiva in so many different ways. This is how it comes up in a different kind of idea. Ultimately, that can be the same. Yeah. Now, Sita?
I think you've got more knowledge on that, so I'll leave it there, but thank you.
Sure. Matrix is asking, can you please provide some source to understand Brahman? I guess the Upanishads will be the best place to go. And you can find, if you go for Ramakrishna Mission website, you may be able to find online versions of Upanishads as well. They got many different Swamis given different translations and explanation of Upanishads. So that is a good place to start. Also, you could look up into Swami Sarvapriyananda's lecture on this topic as well. He's got some wonderful topics, so you could explore more material there, I believe. Anything to add on that, Sitabin?
Yeah, I think also Swami Vivekananda's lecture, The Absolute and the Manifestation, is beautiful. You should definitely have a look at that. It's more inspiring.
No, I agree with Sita. That lecture is one of the best. It actually opened my eyes on how the absolute can become the manifest. It's fantastic lecture. Please read that lecture. That's all I can add to that.
Wonderful. Judge for YouTube has asked, if everyone achieves moksha, what will happen? Will there be another level of evolution beyond humans? Vijay Bhai.
Tough question. I mean, if everybody achieves moksha, then you wonder, will this universe exist as a term? But having said that, there's a difference in approach between the Dvaita and Advaita traditions. By and large, the Dvaita traditions say that if you look at the Ramanuja or Madhava, they say that at the time of Pralaya, means the time of the world when it goes inwards, basically. The world kind of stops. The universe is not now going to crunch and disappear. All the souls which are in a particular state of progress in karmas, they'll be stuck there. The ones in moksha will be there. But by and large, they believe that even somebody who achieves moksha will try and come again to get a chance to serve God. So there is a cycle. In the Advaita case, the idea is that it's a much more principle based, that quite often you forget for whatever reason that who you truly are. Again, you just find you truly are, then you in that state. But if that's continuously and everybody achieves that state, then I guess we're all free. I don't know what happens in that state. It's something even I've thought of. Sita, can you add on that? I'm not.
Yeah, no.
That word.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, once somebody has achieved enlightenment, then, they may choose not to be reborn again. And And that's the end of the cycle for that particular soul. But as Vijay said, there are very special beings out there who decide to take on their limited human frame again and come back down to earth and serve humanity and become prophets for humanity and help to guide the rest of us on that journey. But I guess, it's a sort of ever-evolving cycle. So there are lots of people who sort of become enlightened silently. The amazing thing is we know that there are people out there, but they don't make a big song and dance about it. They might be your next door neighbor and they might have just sort of become enlightened and that's the end of the journey for them and they silently disappear into that. But there are other people who are the saints and prophets that we all know of who sort of want to spread what they have understood about the spirit and help to guide the rest of us. But in terms of the other end of the cycle, there are millions and millions of living organisms who are ready to evolve and become part of the human kingdom, and that's probably why there is a ballooning human population now, because there are so many of us which haven't become enlightened and we keep coming back over and over again, and then all of the sort of living souls from the animal kingdom, plant kingdom coming into the human kingdom and becoming human over and over again. So maybe that's why there is a ballooning human population now. So it's just a never-ending cycle of life, really.
Wonderful answer, Sita Ben.